Yes. So we're going to do some interactive things for the next few months for continuing education. And I'm grateful to Linda, who is our guinea pig in this. Sometimes we're going to have special guests who are a part of this. But Linda is our special guest.
She's our first special guest.
This time, yeah, you are our first special guest. So basically, I'm going to interview Linda. I provided her with some questions ahead of time so she could think about them. And she's going to share with you her thoughts, and we'll have some time that you can ask her questions. And then we'll have a final question and answer and wrap up. So Linda, you have some experience serving as a caregiver. So if you would, please share briefly with us about those relationships.
All right. Well, I come from a family of caregivers. My two grandmothers, wives, and they were often at the bedside of those sick at home and in the hospitals and dying. They were just a comforting presence, I was told all my life. And then my mother became a caregiver to many, and in her 60s, she even became a hospice volunteer. So my first experience being a caregiver was when I was 21, and my dad, who was 44, had a brain tumor, and it affected him like a stroke. And so Gary and I lived about 3 hours away at the time, still in West Virginia, and we would come home at least one weekend a month so that I could help with him, because he had to learn to walk all over again, and twice because the tumor grew back. And then at age 23, my fraternal grandmother, who was such a saintly person, was dying of cancer, and she wanted to die in the peace of her home. So my parents just moved in with her those last 3 months. And again, Gary and I came in every other weekend. He would go to his parents, and then I would stay at my grandmother's to give my mother some respite. Then I helped with my stepdad the last 3 months of his life. And I was also helping with Mother, who was grieving the loss of two wonderful men that she had been married to. I became one of the primary caregivers for my mother and father-in-law, both of whom had dementia at the end. Gary's dad, more severe than his mother. His mother still knew all of us. And I'd been married to their son for 40 years at that time. And I'm so proud to say we had never had a cross word. And I loved him dearly. And then the last few years of my mother's life, she had osteoporosis. She fell and broke her leg. It took 8 months for it to heal. She broke her neck, and that took, probably 6 months. So I was going back and forth helping with her, and then was with her at the end. And of course, now, as you know, I'm taking care of the love of my life and my soulmate, Gary, who has advanced Parkinson's. But I want to quickly share with you how the prayers that you have been praying have been answered, because the last time we went to the doctor, she did adjust his medication, and he is doing so much better. Awesome. So much better. He's only fallen once, and that was the first week. And he's able to stay longer by himself. And so I feel those prayers have been answered. And all of these were kind, caring, loving, faithful Christians who loved and appreciated my caring for them. And it was a blessing for me to care for them.
So as a caregiver, what was hard for you in that role, and what was easy for you in that role?
All right. I think the most difficult was the dementia. Witnessing someone you love and have admired all of your life, or nearly all of your life, fade away before their deaths. Especially my dad's was hard, but Gary's my mom and dad. And then when any of them experience physical pain or emotional pain, and the helplessness that you feel at that time. And then another difficulty, and some of you may have run into this, family members or others giving you advice on what needs to be done in their view, but not willing to help accomplish it. That was difficult. Family members arguing over the needed care, but again, wanting others to handle it. And then, and this really bothers me with Gary, but also with the others I mentioned, when they were not being shown dignity by visitors, doctors, or even family members. Sometimes visitors would visit with me instead of with them, or talk with me instead of with them, or ask questions about them that they were fully capable of answering. And that always bothered me. And I'd always try to direct them, well, my mother can tell you that, or, Reba, that's my mother-in-law. Reba can tell you that. And in Gary's case, what's been hard, and Pastor Jay has kind of helped me with this, is knowing when to give care and assistance and when to back off and let him do it for himself, because I feel that I had become overly protective. He wouldn't say anything, but I would sense it sometimes. So that's hard, and you can do that with anyone. What made it easy? Each of these people I loved and respected so much. They all remained kind and loving to me and were so appreciative of me caring for them. And you know how sometimes dementia patients become very mean. That did not happen with them. And I credit their faithful service to the Lord, because they were all faithful servants. And sometimes I had to give comfort to visitors because they were grieving, their best friends, pastors, and we know pastors need care. Gary's dad had served as a deacon 65 years, and the pastors revered him. I learned that as he was dying, because all that were living came to see him. And there were times when I gave them support because they were grieving. I can remember one instance, one that he was particularly close to, and spoke at his funeral. He had 3 ministers speak at his funeral and a hospice chaplain, because they all loved him so much. But he said to me, I don't know any man that's more prepared to meet their maker than Willard is. And he said, I've often wondered why the body, struggles so much or it stays alive. And I said to him, well, that's an answer we'll find out one day. And I said, I'm sure there's some purpose. We don't know it now. So I was but I was able to tell him, because I knew how much Willard loved and revered him. And he knew that we were going to ask him to be in the service. So, and their friends or their siblings, sometimes you become a caregiver to others that, need care. But what was another thing that was so easy that I loved, my in-laws church had what they called cottage prayer meetings with people like them, and they would come every Friday. They brought guitars and banjos, because this is West Virginia, and they would sing gospel songs, and it was a music. They both loved music. I used to play it for them all the time. That was very helpful. That made it, and it helped Gary and me. It helped pick up our spirits too. And their church families, my mother's church family and theirs were wonderful with bringing food in and having prayer and offering. Sometimes when I couldn't be there, when I'd have to come back, and I knew my mother-in-law just could not cope at night, because we had a woman that replaced me when I had to come home in the day, but she didn't stay the night. I had a list of people, and they would come and spend the night from their church. It was all their church family. And again, what made it easy, they were devout, faithful Christians, didn't fear death. And so when they passed, they went very peacefully. And I wanted to share with you one story about my father-in-law. He had dementia, and he did not know who I was, but he always recognized me. And one time we're out in the breezeway having coffee, because he was a coffee drinker, and so am I. Gary and his other son-in-law are mowing. And he says to me, you know, these fellas come every week and mow my grass and don't charge me a cent. Isn't that wonderful of them? And of course, tears stinging. I said, yes, that is, Willard. That is wonderful. And he noticed that I'd teared up and he said, you know, I love you for 3 reasons. And I said, well, what are those, Willard? And he said, well, you're so kind, you're beautiful, and you have the love of the Lord Jesus. I mean, I just think of that all the time, and it gives me comfort. It gave me comfort then. I was his caregiver.
Awesome.
Yes.
Really good.
Yes. So in these situations, we're often thinking of the people who need care, the care receivers, and not necessarily the people that are providing care for them. Why do you think that is?
Okay, this was the most difficult. I had to think on this the longest. I think it's only natural that that happens, but I do also think it's become better in recent years because there have been so many support groups spring up for caregivers. People are more aware. And so I think it has become better. But I've also noticed, not just in my situations, with others that I know have taken care of families, members, or whatever, it's always the so-called strongest member of the family. You know, I was always called the rock. You know, that Gary's siblings and brothers-in-laws always call me the rock. Well, sometimes rocks crumble, but I've just noticed that. And then they think, well, they can handle it. So they've got it all covered. And I know we have another Stephen minister. I think that was the case in their situation. And after thinking about it, I think some people struggle with it when they see the pain or dementia or terminal illness or whatever the case may be. And it makes them anxious about their own health and their own mortality. And so I think that might be a factor.
What kind of support do you think that caregivers need from friends or from family or even from church members?
Well, above all else, you need their love and prayer and affirmation. And I want to share with you a call Janelle gave me a few weeks ago. And that's all it was love and affirmation. It just filled my heart up. And I just felt so, and I wasn't having a bad day that day. It was a good day, but it just filled my heart up because that's what she did. She expressed her love for me and Gary. She expressed her concern. And I think you're both handling this wonderfully. And I was glad that she included Gary in it. And because that's one of the things that's bothered me, you know, that people sometimes and then several others. Marcia has come by, and her husband, name just like John. John came by, and it was a scheduled visit, which is good. Scheduled visits are always good. Some people, this has not been I think some people need meals brought in, and I think our program, if it's still ongoing with the casseroles, would be good to help a caregiver during grocery shopping if they need it, which I do not, but I know that some probably would, or other errands. Here, what I need help with is doctor's visits, because Gary can walk pretty well, but not long distances. So we have a wheelchair, and it is difficult to negotiate doors and thresholds of doors if they don't have the automatic opening. And only one of his 4 doctors has that. And I have a support system of people who will go to the doctors with me. So I have that worked out with people that work closer. And I know Gary would be comfortable that have offered help. So that's where I've said, well, would you do that? And they've done that and helped me. They offer, you know, to stay with the caregiver, to give them a break for a little while if the care receiver is comfortable with it. And I have a dear friend who, when Gary was bad, would do that. And he loved her, she loved him, and he was really comfortable with her. She worked for us for 15 years and is like a second mother to us. So I don't need it now, but that there were a few times when I needed that, and that is helpful. And also, I think if let's see, I think I hit on. Yeah, that was all of them.
So what are some things that you wish people would say to you? And what are some things that you've heard people say to you that weren't helpful?
Okay. Of course, they love us and they're praying for us, and that they're putting us on their church's prayer chains. Some of Gary's former employers have come to see him. One goes to the Catholic Church, and they have put him on their prayer list, and the Free Methodist and other churches. Marcia calls and texts frequently, and just offering them love and support and affirmation. Now, what things have been said that were not helpful? And these were people who I know love me and love Gary. I just don't think they realized how it was coming across. And of course, this happened when I was carrying with others too. But the "if I were you" comment, I've never liked that comment, because you're not me and you can't be me, so you're not going to do me. And I listened to a sermon one time, and the pastor was talking about that. And he said what they are doing is they're projecting their life experiences on you. They don't have the same life experiences I had, or their beliefs on you. And so I think you need to be careful. And then when Pastor Jay and I were talking about this, and he hit the nail on the head. What they're essentially saying is, you're not doing it right. And then another one, when we first got back and Gary was falling a lot, and I was so afraid that he was going to break a bone and have a major injury, because he was getting cuts and lacerations and so forth. And I was just telling this person who I love and I know loves me that I was afraid he was taking too many chances. And she had taken me out to lunch, and she looked at me and she said, "Well, just tell him if he falls and break a hip, you put him in a nursing home." So I just look at her for about 3 seconds, and I called her by name, and I said, "I would not say that to someone I did not love, let alone somebody I cared for." But I think that got her, I think she realized she'd gone a little too far. And then when this dear friend that I spoke of before, and she's in her upper 80s, and she's lost her husband and son-in-law to leukemia, and she's a caregiver too. She's taking care of many. Well, one day when she was over, Gary was having a very bad day, and Jay's seen him, man, is worse, and he's seen him good. And he was having a lot of freezing spells that he fell twice, and he just wasn't himself. He didn't talk. She and I talked, and we would try to engage him, but he just was not doing well. The next day she calls me, and during the course of the phone call, she begins to cry. But she says, "Linda, I think you need to call David, and have him come to see his dad. I don't think we're going to have him much longer." And again, but she had heard me test, I had told her the doctor said he was in advanced Parkinson's. And so I just said to her, "Well, advanced Parkinson's, it's not like advanced cancer. He could be like this for years, and that's what our prayer is. He may still have years, and that's what we care." And so I started giving her comfort, because she's crying at this point. And then she realized, and then she said, "Well, no, we're not going to give up, and we'll just pray more," and so forth. But I think that sometimes people think they're helping you, and we've got to be careful. And so to combine these two fast questions, I feel I've learned, and we've learned this in Stephen Ministry, that we all need to be a loving, comforting presence for both the caregiver and the care receivers. And as I said, that's what I was told about my mother and about my grandmother, but they were just such comforting presence. And that's where my Bible studies, which have been some of my respites, which is another question. But we need to use the fruit of the Spirit when we're with people, caregivers and care receivers. We need to show them love, joy, and peace with patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And that's what I have come to realize, that we just need to be a presence.
Does anybody have questions about anything that Linda has said so far? Or things that you'd like to know that she didn't cover?
I would like to ask if you feel like your assertiveness training with Stephen Minister has helped you find ways that you can say to people to help them be better.
Yes. Yes. I think I even told Jay when I was sharing this, I said, that's when my assertiveness kicked in, but lovingly, because I knew they were coming from a good place.
Mm-hmm.
They really don't realize, most of these, and even the cliches that we learned in training that we're not supposed to say, we've all said them at one time or another, meaning well, but we've learned that that's not always the case. Thank you.
Pam, Kay, we don't want to leave you out.
I think she's covered everything very well, very well.
Yeah, I'm glad that you've gotten support in the efforts with Gary, because I don't, Gary's not at all along like some of the friends that we've had, but we've had some observations with some friends of ours where the caregiver was the spouse, and sometimes that load on that caregiver, because they weren't being taken care of, sometimes they were the ones that passed away first, which is kind of shocking.
I think an interesting angle that you touched on, Linda, is the part where people come and instead of making everything better with their visit, they make it harder and more work for you to care for them too, because they're so grieved because they've just now come to grips with what the total situation is, maybe. And I've seen that before, or you have kind of the opposite, people that say it's too hard for me to go see them like that, and they won't come at all. And I think that's so disappointing in people that might have been really long-term relationships with you or the person that you're caring for, and then these people just aren't emotionally able to maybe just go see that, or they'll say, I hate hospitals and I can't go there. I hate nursing homes. I can't go. And to try to let people understand that person is still the person that you had the relationship with before they became ill. And out of respect, I mean, the people that are on the outside looking in need to be helped to find a way to be able to still visit or have that relationship instead of just abandon it because it's too hard for me. How hard is it for Linda? How hard is it for her husband to be? Wouldn't you want other people to come and find a way to visit with you and help you pass the time if the tables were turned? So that's always bothered me and like you, I've never been the person who has said that, but I've seen it happen like that before. Oh, it's just too hard for me to see him like that. It's just such a cop-out to me. And I don't know what you really do with that. Or if it's even our place to try to help that person, or you just kind of move on and stay busy. Have you had people?
A couple of Gary's former employees, because he was their boss and they, really respected and liked him. But they told me after, when I'd walk into the door and we'd stand there and they would say, I just didn't know if and I could tell they felt uncomfortable. So I would say to them, well, aren't you glad you've come? Because he enjoyed their visits and they talk business. And I liked it because one of my concerns has been, I don't want people to think Gary has dementia because he does not. And some people assume Parkinson's have, that's a friend from Florida. It's my best friend in Florida. Was I saying?
Gary doesn't have dementia.
Yes, yes,
He's not able to.
and I don't think Mike Upmore and Jonah can't. I don't think Mike would care because they're devout Catholics and they're putting him on the list. But that's what he said to me. He said, I wanted to come, but I was just burned. And he said, I'm so glad that he's so. I forget what he said, aware or something. And I thought to myself, I wonder if he's thought, maybe Gary's not. And I said, aren't you glad you came? Because it's still the same man. He just can't get around as well as he used to. So, that I have. But I have, when my dad was dying, that was one of the things my brother would say. I just can't stand to see him like that. So he just offered no help. But that happens sometimes.
Martha.
I have a question. You mentioned the cottage prayer meetings in West Virginia. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, and
it sounds really cool.
Yeah, it was. And it's just a group of people. As a matter of fact, my first cousin, because my aunt and uncle went to Gary's church even. And my first cousin is one of the organizers. He's a deacon. And it's just a group of people. It's not all, it wasn't always the same ones, but that a cottage, and they go to shut-ins on Friday nights. And they'll go to, they stay between a half hour and an hour, depending on how it goes. And then they go to another. So they're out sometimes, 2 hours on Friday evenings. And they may do it Saturday evenings too. But I thought that was really neat.
Because when you said that, I had a little bit of a brainstorm.
Mhm.
Because I thought about how appreciative people are when we carol at Christmas time. Why don't we carol to Christmas in July? Yeah. Or just go sing. Yeah.
Mhm.
I remember as a kid, we would go as groups in Timber Creek, actually saying to the people who stay home, my dad really appreciates that.
Yeah.
Someone would show up and he would get all excited. And when the Silers would show up and Myers was with them, my dad said, well, I had Myers Woodward in the front yard, stand up, But I think that those things are so important.
Where my mother and father lived up in the mountains of West Virginia, there was a big Mennonite village, and they owned a bakery, and mom and dad were there all the time, and they had a country store, and they just loved my mom and dad. So they came at Easter and sang Easter carol, Easter songs, and they came at Christmas. And then mother's handyman after dad passed was one of the Mennonites, and he would never let us pay him. And his name was John. And I said, John, we can afford to pay you for your services. Always quote me the scripture about taking care of the widows.
Mm-hmm.
And
Well, I have one more for you.
this is my favorite one.
Well, good.
This
How-
was easy to do.
How have you found respite in the midst of caregiving? And are there ways that people could help you have respite as a caregiver?
Well, how I found respite was my Bible studies. I had a few years ago, I think 3 years ago, a study. This is not the book, but I just brought this on the armor of God. And then, the fruit of the Spirit. And I learned enough about those that sometimes I need the gospel of the peace, that, I didn't need the full armor of God, but I needed the shield of faith, and I needed the sword of the Spirit and the peace. And then this January was so hard on both of us. And I've shared this with all of you, and I'll share it one more time. But the day that Gary had his fall was a Stephen Ministry Day. And when I took the laptop into the bedroom, and when you prayed, that just gave him such comfort. And he even roused a little bit because he had been kind of in a dazed state all day, which was really concerning to me. And he really roused. I don't know if you guys noticed it, but he seemed like himself. He probably sounded weak, but that gave us such comfort. And then the Stephen ministry, because I was able to continue it. And as I've told Pastor Jay, my care receiver is just such a wonderful young woman, but her life story is so much more difficult than mine ever was. And it continues to be. She continues to struggle where I haven't had those. I've been so blessed. So that helped me stay strong. And then I love flower gardening. So Gary used to do all the watering and weeding, and I've learned to love that part of it too. I just like the planting and the deadheading and all that, but I've learned, I kind of like that watering. And my book clubs, I'm an avid reader, but I'm very selective. I haven't read very many novels because I'm in these Bible studies, and the one on the Bible has taken up most of my time. And I've been able to attend my ladies groups, which some of you are in, my PEO group and my Delta Kappa Gamma group. And that was so helpful again in January, when I would see people that I knew and had known forever, like Becky, because I, knew Becky since we first came here. Having lunch with friends, that's nice. And then talking to my sister, and she came and stayed 2 weeks with us when, Gary fell, and she's a caregiver too. She's a wonderful caregiver. And then it helps us both to listen to gospel music. And one of Gary's therapists, or both of them, when he was having physical therapy, said, "Do you like music?" And, we said yes. And then they suggested that we listen every day, which we do most days. And so we started doing that. And I had used it with my mother when she had her broken neck and had to lie flat, and it gave her comfort. And one song, there's two songs that have special meaning for me. The one is called The God on the Mountain, and Linda Randall sings it. And some of the words are, the God on the mountain is still God in the valley. The God in the good times is still good God in the bad times. The God of the day is still God in the night. And I'm sure you could find that on YouTube by Linda Randall. And then my favorite one, it often makes me cry, but it's a cleansing cry. And that song is Praise His Name. And there was a line in it that came to me that day. And I didn't dare listen to it because I was already so upset. But in one of the lines, Sherry Easter sings this. And she said, it says, "Pray the hurt away." And that's what I would do. I would just pray the hurt away. And I've shared that with my care receiver with Stephen Ministry. And that when we have our doubts and fears, when we're at our lowest points, we still praise his name.